All right, so I want to thank you for joining me today. We're going to do front-end foundations, lesson 6 and 7. Essentially, we're just going to look at Bootstrap and some DOM manipulation here. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. So here I have a project open here. I don't have any files yet, but we can go ahead and put those in there. We can add them by hitting this plus icon, or we can do it through the terminal, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm going to go ahead and do it through the terminal to save some time. So I'll just do my touch command and create the files that I need. Okay, and I have those files created, and then we are going to go ahead and incorporate Bootstrap into our project. So in order to do that, first we need to go to the Bootstrap site. So you can just open up your browser and go to getbootstrap.com. Click on this Get Started button here. And here we can just go ahead and copy the starter template. What the starter template has is the meta tags that it needs in order for it to be responsive. We have the Bootstrap CSS, which is that CSS framework that we're importing. So basically we have the ability to use Bootstrap's components. Basically all it is a bunch of pre-written CSS that we can use in our own code. So it can save us a lot of time as far as styling, and then we can overwrite the Bootstrap classes and components if we wanted to change a color or font or width or what have you. And then we have 3 scripts here. These are needed in order to run some of the components that Bootstrap have. So we have jQuery and some JavaScript here. So I am just going to go ahead and click this copy, and then I'll go back and just paste it here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and remove this H1 tag and then change the title here. All right. So now we have successfully imported Bootstrap into our project by using a CDN. There are other ways to import Bootstrap. You can download the files and just have those files in your projects and refer to them as you would any other file in your project, or you can do it through a CDN, which is what we've done here. So that's just a content delivery network. All right, so now that we have the template started here, we can go ahead and import different components of Bootstrap. So there's a bunch of components that Bootstraps have. You have navigation bars, you have forms, you have jumbotrons, buttons, basically anything that you would put on your page. So what we're going to go ahead and look at is a form, for example. So we go to the Bootstrap site and go to components. And then here is a long list of components that Bootstraps have. So I'm just going to go to the forms. And here it gives you an example of a number of different forms that you could use, examples, and then it gives you the code for that. So we're just going to go ahead, and there's a form towards the bottom that we're going to use. This one right here, we go ahead and use a larger form, and we can just go ahead and copy and paste it into our code. So I am just going to go ahead and paste it. Now, oops, got a little typo there. Now, if we save this and we open our page, we're going to get that exact same form. Okay. Now, there might be things that we want to change. Maybe we don't need this to be a sign-in button. Maybe we need it to say something else, or maybe we don't need email and password. Maybe we just need first name and last name, what have you. So what we can do is we can adjust the Bootstrap code that's given to us to replace it with things that we need. So for example, if I wanted to go ahead and add states to the state option here, if we go back here and I click here, all I get is a dot, dot, dot. Okay, that's because the code here, has option dot, dot, dot. So this is where we would go ahead and replace it with what we want. So there's a bunch of states, so I'm just gonna do just 3. So Arizona, let's do California, let's do Texas. Okay, so we'll have 3 states there, and then it will update accordingly. So if I go ahead and refresh and I select, now I have those options. Okay, we can also add different fields to it. Let's say we don't need address to, maybe we want to put an age or something on there, or the first and last name. So we can add that to our form. So here, we can go ahead and just copy this div. And then we can change the information as needed. Okay, so here we will have first name instead of email. That's gonna be our label. And then we're gonna have to change the ID, right? So here we'll do first, and then we'll have to change this to first. And then we'll change the placeholder to first name. And then the type is going to be text. Okay, so basically what Bootstrap does to you, it gives you a template to work off of. And then you can go ahead and change it to your specific needs. So there we've added a label for first name, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do the same for last name. Okay, so I'll just copy this div here and paste it. Did it paste? There we go. And then I'll change it to reflect last name. So I'll change the IDs, I'll change the label, and I'll change my placeholder. Okay. So now I've added first name and last name into my form. And if we take a look here, we can see that we have a row with our first name, last name, email, and password. So we can go ahead and save that and take a look and see what that looks like on our page. And now we have first name and last name added to our form. Okay. All right, are there any questions on what I've done so far?
Oh, no.
Okay, so that's basically anytime you're copying a component from Bootstrap, you want to take a look at the code that you are copying because you may not need it all. There might be parts of the code that you won't need. Maybe you need to add some more. So it's really important for you to read over the code and make sure you're understanding what you're copying. Now with Bootstraps, you'll see a lot of this column, either small, medium, or large, and then a number. What that's doing, it's dividing a row up into a grid system. So an entire row adds up to 12. So basically, however you want to divide the columns has to add up to 12. So you can do that evenly. You can have 2 columns of 6. Maybe you have a column that takes up 8 and another column that takes up 4. However you divide it, it has to equal 12. If you want 4 columns divided evenly, they take up 3 spaces. Now, the medium, small, and large is dependent on your viewport. So this is saying on a medium-sized viewport, I want it divided into 6. You can also split it up into, let's say you had a small viewport and you wanted it to take up the whole space. So you can designate what space it's going to take up depending on the actual viewport size. Now, if you're wondering what those numbers are as far as viewport, on the Bootstrap website, you can go to layout and then grid. And then here it explains the columns, but here it tells you the exact pixels that you'll be dealing with. So that way you can better plan what viewports you're dealing with. So for example, if you're coding something and you want it to look a specific way on a smartphone, for example, you can see what that viewport size is and kind of adjust your code accordingly. Because if you have a big form with a bunch of tables, with a bunch of columns in it, it's not going to look that great on a phone, for example, because it's going to be so tiny. So maybe you want to split that up and have them each on their own row. And that way you can adjust the column sizes on there. So the big story here is each row equals 12 columns. And then you can divide that up however you want. You just have to make sure it equals 12. Are there any questions on how the grid system kind of works for Bootstrap?
Well, if it's something that you want to do, like it can look the same across all of them, just do the column and then whatever you want it to be, or?
Yeah, you could just put column dash and then it will be it for all of them because it's saying extra small, but it's also just going to apply for all of them. Unless you specify specifically the different viewport sizes and you have multiple classes, then it will change accordingly.
Okay, so even if you did like column medium 12 or column medium 6 and then another 6, it's still going to apply to all of them if you only have one written down.
Right, exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that is the Bootstrap grid system here. And basically anytime you are Bootstrap after a while is very secondhand. Basically what you're doing is you're copying and pasting templates and then changing them accordingly. So for example, in the button that we have here, and I'm just gonna take this out. In the button that we have this class button primary, and that's controlling how that button looks. So if I wanted to overwrite that, I kind of have to know what these classes are doing. With Bootstrap, I'm not exactly sure where the place is where you can see all the classes and what they say, but what I personally like to do and save me some time is use my inspection tools. So I will just go ahead and right click and hit inspect. And then I will highlight my sign in. And then you can see that the classes are right here. So you can see that the button primary class is what's controlling the color of it. And then the button class is controlling the inline, the font, and other things here like the height, border radius, how it has that little curve. And you can see what those classes are doing. So let's say I wanted to overwrite that. I didn't want it to be blue, I wanted it to be green. So what I can do is in my CSS, I can target that class, btn-primary, and I can change that. Background color, let's say green, okay? I want to change that color of that button to be green instead of blue. Now, in order for the CSS to overwrite my Bootstrap CSS, I have to put my personal custom CSS underneath my Bootstrap CSS. Since it loads from top to bottom, whatever's on bottom is going to take precedence. So here, custom CSS, I'll just link it. And now when I go ahead and refresh, we see that that was overwritten. Now, it only overwrites the exact property that I decided to overwrite, okay? So the font color is still the same, the border color is still the same. I can overwrite all of it, I would just have to target that in that specific CSS.
Right.
So it will still inherit everything from Bootstrap, but it will overwrite the exact property that I need to overwrite. And sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, since in the Bootstrap templates, you could have like 5 classes in one element. So using your inspection tools really helps out seeing what does what, and what you need to overwrite if you wanted to change something specifically.
Right.
All right, so that's how you can incorporate your own custom CSS to work with Bootstrap, because although this is giving you a nice template, it may not be exactly what you wanted, right? So maybe you like the shape of the button and you like the text, but you don't like the hover, or you don't like the color, or maybe you don't like the text. You can go ahead and overwrite that in your own personal CSS, but it did save you the time from writing all of that other CSS that it took in order to create this button.
Right.
So that is basically Bootstrap in a small nutshell. There are other frameworks available to you. Bootstrap's one of the most commonly used, and almost every developer knows how to use it. But do not be afraid to try others. There's Materialize that's done by Google that's also gaining popularity. W3 Schools actually has their own one. I haven't played with that one. But there's many others out there that you could, get your hands on if you wanted to try them out. But I do highly recommend knowing Bootstrap, because almost any position that you're going to have most likely is going to use Bootstrap.
Gotcha.
But as you were working through the lesson 6, did you have any questions that you ran into in Bootstrap that you wanted me to kind of go over?
From lesson 6, yeah, I think one of the things I was struggling with outside of the drop downs, which is just linking, was the way that it was laid out with the table and the form that we set up. I think I made it work. I made it look the way it should have, but I don't know that I necessarily did it the right way. What I did is I had them set up, and I thought I had them in the same container, the same div container.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I created the column -6 for both of them, I thought it would put them in line with each other, but it ended up not doing that. I had to...
Do you have your rows in there?
Yeah, I have the div class row.
Okay.
And I have them under the same div class there as well. So it's they're both in the same container, and they're both in the same row. But what I had to end up doing was, instead of doing column 6, I had to do column offset 6 for the table, and that got them to line up. And I wasn't sure why that would have needed to be the case.
I would have to look at the code exactly. And if you want to send that to me, I'd be more than happy to look over to see why it would need the offset. There might be another class with that the form is using that might require the offset. But if you send that to me, I'll be more than happy to take a look at it. And then
I'll send you the zip file here on Slack.
Awesome. But yeah, I could take a look, because sometimes what happens is with these Bootstrap classes, there's so many properties you can see here in this button alone.
Right.
And one of these properties could be one of those things that causes those issues. So I can take a look and see what properties are being applied to see why you would need that offset. And usually forms are a little bit tricky because they kind of act a little bit different than you expect them to. And CSS is a lot of trial and error. And that's why, most developers aren't huge fans of CSS, because it doesn't do always what you expect it to do. But I'll take a look at that and definitely let you know. Lost you for a second.
Yeah, sorry about that. As I was sending it over, it closed out Zoom on me.
No worries.
But yeah, no, as you were saying, like with the trial and error, what I was looking at, I was trying to look at the elements and where it had the margin set up and all of that. It didn't show any type of a margin on the form, but on the table it had a huge margin, and I was trying to get rid of that. That didn't work. So it was throwing me off all over.
Okay. I'll take some time to take a look at it so I can better assess the situation and see what exactly was going on.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. But what I always do, and I've been using Bootstrap for years and I still have to do it, is I just, open up my inspections tool and start playing around to see kind of what works. With CSS, it's not an exact science always. Sometimes it works how it's supposed to, and sometimes it doesn't. And that's really more of like, how specific are you calling it? And when you're incorporating these other CSS frameworks, sometimes you have to be extremely specific. So maybe using an ID in that situation might target it a little bit better. Sometimes you have to say, let's say if I say form button, I'm talking about the button that's inside of a form. Sometimes you have to be very specific.
Right.
So again, I'll take a look and see what exactly happened. But overall, using the inspection tools is going to be your best friend when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. So that is kind of incorporating a Bootstrap component there. And then as you can see, as I was using my inspection tools, you can kind of play around with the different viewports to see how it's going to respond. So before you put anything into production, you can kind of test out the different viewports to see how it's going to look. All right, so here, now that we have incorporated some Bootstrap in here, we can go ahead and kind of add some extra. Let's just add some styling to it. So in my form, let's say I'll give it a background color of black just to add some CSS and jazz it up. And then we have our Bootstrap component. So now that we have our Bootstrap component, we can start using what we've learned from previous lessons and courses here. So for example, I have a form here and maybe I need to validate and make sure that the first name has more than one character in it. Okay, so this is what we're going to take from what we learned in coding from scratch, but also what we're reiterating in front-end foundations. So we're going to have to use our JavaScript. So I put my personal JavaScript always at anything that you write custom, just always put it on the bottom because that's what loads last, and more than likely you want to overwrite something that's been written. So we are going to put in our script tag, use source, script.js, and then I'll go ahead and close my script tag so that I've connected my personal JavaScript to my HTML file. And let's say I wanted to get the value of this input right here for first name, and I want to make sure that it has more than one character in it. Okay, so we're doing some form validation here. So in my JavaScript, and I'm just going to put these side by side so we can see them. In my JavaScript, we're going to go ahead and add a function for when this button is submitted. So let's say we take out the type here and we just add onClick. And let's say on click, I'm going to perform the function validate. Okay. So here in my JavaScript, I'm going to have a function called validate. And within that, I'm going to grab the input for first name. So I'll create a variable first, and then I will use the DOM here. So document get element, and this is all things we've done in coding from scratch. Grab element by ID, and we're going to use the ID for this input, which is first, and then I'll go ahead and grab the value. Okay, so I have grabbed the value of that input, and then I want to check to see if first has, I want to make sure that the first name is more than one character long. So maybe I'll use an if statement, and I'll say if first dot length is greater than 1, then I'm going to put an alert that says, yay, the form is valid. Else, I'll put an alert that says, the form is invalid. Okay. So we'll go ahead and save that. And then we'll go ahead and come back here and refresh. We can see that our CSS was added, but I probably should have changed the text here, but we can ignore that for now. Google is about to give all my personal information. And go ahead, and then we can say, yay, the form is valid because it is more than one character. Now, if I were to redo this, and I could just ignore all of these since all we're checking is this first name, just to save some time, click sign in. The form is invalid. So when you are working on lesson hands-on 7, what you're going to be doing is form validation. So what you are going to be incorporating is that DOM manipulation. So we're going to get input from the user. We'll create variables for that, and then it will just be a matter of if statements, seeing if it meets the specific requirements. So those requirements could be greater than one character. It could be if it's capitalized, if the first letter is capitalized, and that's using specific regex. So with regex, let's say let regex equal, I can't remember the exact regex. I always have to look up regex, but let's say we're looking for capital letter. So here, regex capital letter. I always look it up, so don't worry if you feel you're looking up regex. I never have this memorized. So here, we're checking to see if there is a capital letter small followed by a small letter. Okay, so we can go ahead and try this for an example. And you set that equal to that regex expression. And then you would use the match method, match function. So it would be first dot match and then regex. Okay, and then if it matches those requirements, it will return true. Otherwise, it will return false. So when you are working on your lesson hands-on for lesson 7 hands-on, you'll be grabbing the input from the user and just basically doing form validation, whether that's using the length method to see if it's greater than 1. Maybe there's something specific that you need to look for that requires a regex. If you don't know the regex, in the lessons, they give you examples of specific combinations, but also I always look them up because I never memorize it. And you find a lot of developers don't have that memorized, so don't feel bad if you don't. And then you would just use that match function and then that regex expression inside of it. You could technically put the regex expression inside of here, but for it to be cleaner, and if you need multiple regex expressions to check for different qualifications, you would create different variables for that.
Right.
Are there any questions on anything we've discussed?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward from there.
Awesome. All right, so that is all I had for you today. If you do have any other questions, whether on like specific Bootstrap components that you were working on that you might need assistance with, or if you're working on form validation in lesson 7, just reach out and let me know. I'll be more than happy to help you. If you want to know more about regex specifically, I have a previously recorded workshop that goes all over regex that I can send to you as well, or you can locate in the announcements where it says workshop library.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Well, thanks again for always coming, Ryan. I appreciate your attendance.
No worries. No worries.
All
Thank
right.
you for
Yeah,
the
no
attention
problem.
very much.
If you have any questions, just let me know.
All right, will do. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.